remember very, very specifically going to meet Jerry for the first time, to see his home on the east side of New York. There was this incredible entry hall where there were these two very, very powerful late Guston paintings. And immediately I knew that I was meeting somebody who was incredibly engaged with the art that he was collecting. There's a very strong psychological weave that penetrates pretty much all of the objects in the collection. This was not in any way decorative, this was really about human drama. Jerry's collection really came to fruition throughout the 1980s. The same exacting standards that had clearly gone into the establishment of a highly successful career in the metals trading industry converted itself once Jerry started to collect in depth. What sort of integrates probably the core elements within the collection is this desire to put together some of the best 20th century figures of painting, all of whom have this sense of dexterity in paint, the physicality of paint also. But that's just the physical process. I think in addition to that is this delving into the human psychology. Jerry was as much somebody who was loyal to the artist's works that he collected as he was the relationships of certain key advisors that he liked to work with.
I first met Jerry in the mid-80s actually when I was working at David McKee Gallery. Jerry really loved the gallery program, he loved the power of paint, and we represented the estate of Philip Guston, who in the early 80s was finding acclaim, but he still was someone who was not collected by the mainstream. I love both the Guston paintings, but I find Red Sky particularly exciting. And I learned when I was working at the gallery that Red Sky was this bifurcated horizon, and it looks like you have something shallow with paint brushes in it. But in fact, if you look carefully, those are billy club sticks. And what looks to be a can is actually an arm. It was really in a response to the 1968 Democratic Convention when there were the riots and the demonstrations and kids were beat up. So Red Sky was the night was flaming, and you realize what they're holding. And they can also be interpreted as paintbrushes. It's his own battle with paint, his constant demons, but you just get lost in that red paint because it goes from shiny to dry, and you see the black underneath, and every time you look at it, you see something new.
Guston was an artist who clearly started with an abstract expressionist idiom, but as a political artist, found that in the 1970s, for example, he needed to adopt a different lexicon of elements to his painting. If you look at the legs rug floor painting, this is really the core of what Guston was doing in 1976 when this was executed. These objects seem to fall down the painterly structure with the clock ticking away. It was a highly productive time for him, but very introspective. The Bacon study for a portrait from 1981 was acquired from Auerbach Gallery shortly after it was painted, and is the very last portrait of George Dyer, who was Bacon's great love. And I think what you're looking at in 1981 is Bacon already in his autumnal years, beginning to reflect, if you like, on the most important subjects throughout his whole career, and still challenged to innovate in his painterly language or painterly journey. So you have a painting which is very, very pared down, a combination between that wonderful, very soft sky blue paint, this unpainted canvas in the bottom left-hand corner, this well-known image of Dyer in the studio after a photograph by John Deacon, but then decapitated separately when you have that isolated silhouette of George Dyer's features. And then behind the head, you've got this extraordinary decorative letraset against that circular motif as well, which carries influence from a mirror that was installed in the Rhys Muse studio. So there's all sorts of formal but equally psychological things that are happening in the work. I mean, again, this George Dyer depiction is an exorcism for this artist. It's an ability to get over the human drama in his life as well, but through the medium of his painting.
Jerry actually spent a lot of time in London being in the commodities business, and he had an interest in the School of London. So there was obviously the Bacon painting, which was one of the great acquisitions in his lifetime, but he also loved the work of Howard Hodgkin and Frank Auerbach. And in the library, you had a very powerful presentation of Auerbach and Hodgkin's work, which was always a treat because it was a dark paneled room, and these paintings were so rich.
At the time when I first met Jerry, I'd never seen Frank Auerbach collected in a New York-based collection, and I think that when you look at this portrait of Julia, for example, this is not just about a 3D rendering in paint. This is really about a psychological profiling of a personality that this person knows incredibly well. Julia Wolstenholme, who was the mother of Frank's son, Jake. There's an intimacy, if you like, to this object and a statuesque quality to this paint. And I think, again, Jerry was really like that. There's a wrestling in this collection to get to understand what the kind of, the motivations of the artist really were. Gerry was really interested in, I think, also artists at the height of their power. So if you think about the Kooning painting, for example, painted in 1975, when Kooning himself quoted, he couldn't put a foot wrong in the studio. He was living in the Hamptons, had this incredible sort of period of creativity. Every one of those paintings from that period, and particularly Untitled 10 that we'll be selling, has this wonderful dexterity of abstract strokes across it, but this extraordinary fire of energy and colour and variety. I think it's very crucial to the collection that certainly the works by Kooning, Frank Auerbach, Francis Bacon, all come from the very mature periods of those artists' careers and works.
What's so profound about this collection is that there's this really beautiful dialogue that is like a rhythm through the collection, from smaller to the larger works, brought together by this wonderful universal vision that he had.
These 37 works represent a collection that was put together over a 10-year period roughly, but then enjoyed for over 30. So much of this art is incredibly timeless. It was a collection that was put together through painstaking research and dialogue around the artist. Emblematic, challenging, but ultimately highly fulfilling.